So we left off class on Tuesday, and I showed you guys that video on the federal debt, and you guys saw the scope and the size of how much debt we actually have as a country and what it would look like if we were to stack the bills on top of each other. Okay, but what exactly is that? The federal debt is just the total amount of money that we owe that the federal government has not paid back yet. How much do we actually have? Well, you guys can follow this Twitter account if you want. It's called National Debt Tweets. It tweets periodically about how much debt we have. This was just from a couple days ago. We're approaching $28 trillion in debt. So it is a very, very high number. Okay, and when you first hear that, a lot of people wonder, how is it that, we have this much debt? Where are we getting this much money from? And the main reason why we have the debt, to keep it short, is the same way any individual would get debt, right? We spend more than we take in taxes, right? So we give more services, spend more on our military than we can really afford to do with our taxes. So where do we get the extra money that we don't have from taxes? Well, we can get it from a couple places. You could take loans out from the World Bank. The country can take out, the United States government can take out a loan from the World Bank, much like we would take a loan out if we were buying a house or buying a car. Okay. We also can take loans out from the Federal Reserve, which is just the U.S. central bank, which is kind of interesting to think about because we're basically taking a loan from ourselves and then repaying ourselves. And that's really complicated, and I don't want to get into all that. We can also take loans from private institutions. So you guys may have heard of places like Bank of America or Wells Fargo or, any bank that you've driven past or maybe use yourself. We can take loans from them. And the last thing we do is we issue bonds. I'm sure a lot of you guys have bonds. Maybe like your grandparents bought them for you. Basically what a bond is when the government needs money, they sell bonds. And what a bond is the government might say, I'll sell you this $100 bond, okay? It won't be worth $100 for 10 years, but if you give me $50 now, I'll sell you this bond. So it's basically like saying if you have extra money, you can buy a bunch of bonds, and then in 10 years, it'll be worth more money. All right, so that would be how they take loans out from the public. Okay, and then you sit there and you say, well, if we have all these loans and we don't have enough money to pay for everything, how do we pay off the loans ever? Well, the way loans work the same way, whether it's a country taking a loan out, whether it's a person taking a loan out for a house, or whether it's a person paying off a credit card. All right. So I'm going to use the credit card example because it's probably the most applicable to individuals. So every month when you get a credit bill, this is a sample credit card bill that I found on Google. All right. You have a couple things that come up. You have your new balance, which means this is how much money you spent the month before. So let's say, for this example, this person spent $500 the month before. If you don't want to pay any interest, all right, that means you just want to borrow the $507 and pay back $507. You need to pay that within the pay period. So like for this case, you probably spent the money, $500 in June, and then by July 24th, you need to pay it off. And then you won't have to pay interest or additional money because you borrowed it. But if you can't pay that full $500, that's okay. You can still continue to borrow. You just have to pay interest, all right? And the minimum amount of money you have to pay until the credit card company would come after you is $10, all right? So you can essentially say, this is not a good financial strategy, but if you took out $500, you could essentially pay $10 the next month, and no one's going to come after you. You're making the minimum payment. The problem with making the minimum payment is then you pay the most money in interest. What the U.S. government does is basically that. They don't pay off the full loan. They don't pay the minimum payment, but they pay somewhere in between. So interest is accumulating that they need to pay, but people are still willing to let them take money because they've always made payments. So that's essentially how the U.S. government continues to do this. So whether we take a loan from the World Bank, a loan from a different country, if we take a loan from our own bank or from a private institution, that's what we do. We never pay the loans all the way off. We just pay for the interest and then as much of the loan as we can. All right. So the main reason why so that's one reason how the government can still function, right? We can still function because we continue to make payments. We just don't pay the full debt off. Okay. And the other thing that is important is that a country will continue to get loans if they have a good debt to GDP ratio. Okay, and this is going to sound really complex, and you don't need to know too much about this. Okay, but what GDP is the total measure of a country's economy in dollar figures. So it would be like everything that's made in the country, how much money like the country's businesses make into a dollar figure. All right, so just think about like if you were to measure, to keep it super simple, if you were to measure a country's economy by a dollar figure, like if you were going to say this country's got such a big economy, their economy is worth X amount of dollars, that would be their GDP. All right, it stands for gross domestic product. And if you divide the total amount of debt a country has by their GDP, okay, that means that the countries are very likely to be able to pay off their debt. So in the United States, right, our debt has not yet surpassed our total amount of GDP. So because of that, we can continue to borrow. Now we're close, okay? We're a little bit over 1 or right around 1. What you want to be at is if you're under 1, meaning you have less debt than you have GDP, like let's say you have $10 trillion in debt and $20 trillion in GDP, then you're fine. When your total debt gets way higher than your GDP, like let's say you had $40 trillion in debt and only $20 trillion in GDP, that's when you would start to see a little bit of a problem. Okay? So anyway, that's how we currently keep functioning, but why aren't we fixing this? Well, here's the problem. I want you guys to envision a politician who runs on the fact that they want to save the debt or they want to pay off debt. That's all well and good, but what does that mean? That means that they are saying that they're going to raise taxes, 1, and 2, they're going to cut government services, cut funding to the military, all these things that nobody is going to want to hear. So no politician is going to get elected on a platform that says, I'm going to tackle the federal debt. So because of that, we keep getting politicians that are offering more and taxing less. So that's just something that we all need to be aware of as American citizens if this is something that we want to fix. All right, so that's the information on the debt, guys. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. All right, make sure you now go and answer the question about how do we continue to function as a government with this much debt. Thanks for paying attention, guys.